G'day, this is Chris. This is Flat Tank Journey. Welcome back to my shed. It's a cold and wet spring day. Weird. And I've just lit the fire again. Welcome back to the BSA Wedge Tank project and a look at the clutch. I'm really optimistic about the clutch. I feel as though things have gone well. Parts have arrived, or in particular some friction discs that I had cut. I want to get this back on the bike, or at least mocked up on the bike so we can have a look at it. And I wanted to show you the gear change lever and what I did to it, because I skirted over that in an episode a couple of times before. And then I want to have a quick look at the Kickstarter and explain why it's not a BSA one and it isn't correct for the bike. Looking at the clutch down on the bench, and I lost all the sound for this again, so dubbed over the top. We're looking at all the parts of a simple 2-disc clutch. Now they're the old friction plates that came in the clutch, and they're worn, they're a bit greasy, and I just used them as patterns to get these new ones cut. I went to the water jetters in Geelong that I go to often, and Sandy cut me out a couple. That was friction material that I already had, and I'd bought it 15 years ago. So it didn't cost a lot. I think it was $44 to have the 2 discs cut. Sandy did mention that she quite often cuts stuff for the clutch and brake service in Geelong. And so getting a relationship with your local water jet service might be the way to go. They might already have friction material or can get it and can cut you out discs. This is the backing plate with what I'd call the main piece through it. And it just slides through, and it's on what I would call really big splines or notches or keyways. Cutest little brass bearing with ball bearings contained in it. And I cleaned that and gave it a light grease. Friction plate goes on top, then the sprocket goes on top of that. Now this sprocket was super clean. The teeth are a little sharp, but not bad. It goes over the top after you pull out the red gum wood chips, and sits neatly around that bearing and just turns. Another friction plate. Now these are slightly a hair bigger than the old ones, or thicker, but still look really good. And then the pressure release plate, I suppose it is, goes on over the splines. This is a fiddly little part to get together. There's 8 springs go over those little lugs, and then you've got to try and turn it upside down or turn the clutch upside down. Either way, things tend to fall apart, and I think you see that here in a second. Difficult to get together and just a bit of a pain in the bottom. I think it's why on later ones you see the springs have mounting tabs on the pressure release plate. So fingers over 6 springs and down it goes, and then place in the other 2 springs, and that works so much better. Now that plate with the springs attached to it has teeth in it that have got to line up with the keys or the splines that are on that main shaft. And then the special nut just screws on. And when it's right, it screws on really easily. But again, it's a very fine thread, and you don't want to risk cross-threading it. Now, the plate needs to line up over the keyways or the splines as you tighten it down so that it goes over the top and it won't spin. Bit of a difficult thing to get done. I've just been using the spanner off my mill drill to tighten things up. It'll grab fairly well until the spring's tight, and then it kind of gives a little bit. But overall, you can see the process. You've got to tighten that nut down, and you've got to tighten it down a fair bit to get a good outcome. In fact, as I put this on the bike, I think it needs tightened down further so that that nut is flush with the threaded piece that it screws onto. And that way it gives that top dome more clearance to the clutch, so that you're not pulling the pressure plate away as you tighten the dome up. But I explain that a bit more over at the bike. You're kind of looking over my left shoulder and you can see here's the gearbox. Now I put the sprocket back on and tightened up the nut. Not super tight, but tight enough for these purposes. In my box of parts that came with the bike, I found the Woodruff key. And it's why, you know, the box of parts is literally gold. Inside the clutch, there's a slot for the Woodruff key. Roughly line it up and over it'll go. There it goes. Then there's the weird nut to hold it on. And they're pains in the bottom, these nuts, because you can only tighten them so far with your hand. Then you need a socket, and you never bring a socket with you that's the right size. For my purposes today, I think, you know, it's enough. Now, here's the cap, and the cap's been repaired inside, brazed up. Now the cap appears to sit slightly proud of this steel disc, or this ring nut needs tightened down to the next level, and I think that's probably what needs to be done, but I'm not going to over tighten it at this point. The springs, well, they're pretty well compressed, but I suspect it needs to go just a couple of mil further. You can actually wind these nuts on to the point that you loosen the pressure on the clutch by pulling the next disc away. So just need to be slightly careful of that, because I did that in video number 2 that has no sound. Let's get that done up, or at least pretty well done up. There we go. So there's only 4 nuts. And, you know, if you over tighten them, they'll pull that disc away and you'll end up with no friction. And we'll knock it into gear. And we find that we have, you know, we have tension on the clutch, which is super, out of gear. So there it is. There's the little clutch. And it appears to work okay. It's super simple. Any of us can take these apart. Getting friction material is always a challenge, and getting the discs, but honestly, I think I paid big money for the first lot of friction material. Since then, using the water jetter to cut stuff out has been a godsend. I drop the parts off, get them cut, go back, pay the money, and it's done. I think that'll hold up super well and will look to business. Now we're having a closer look. You can see there's a slight gap behind there. You can see into the rear sprocket, and you can see that if I over tighten these, it will pull that plate away and you lose tension on the clutch. So that's why I think the nut underneath needs to be tighter. All in all, it's a good result. Other side of the bike. Now, I've had this gear change lever on and off this bike so many times that I'm not doing it again. You might remember there was 4 holes here that went all the way through and 1 rivet, and that this was broken away from the bike. All I did was drill holes, just enlarged them, tapped a 1/4 inch cycle thread. I did then skim the head off the nut, off the bolts, and tighten them up. Now, this is a weak spot here. This used to have a tab that went over there, and it breaks, or it looks like it does when I research online. Just appears to be a fault. This would be a Farmer Joe or blacksmith or light engineer's resolution to your gear change lever falling off. Does it work? Hell yeah, it works. I think it's going to hold in place. I think it's a fair repair. If I had an original lever or knew where I could get one, I'd buy one. But I don't, so I won't. Now, the Kickstarter that I've procrastinated about for ages. Now, I went to the trouble of putting a rubber on it, and that doesn't really matter, but it is not off a motorcycle. Graham, who comments regularly and is a good guy, pointed out no Kickstarter tab on the back. Nowhere for the spring to mount. So it is bicycle. And has to be, because there's nowhere for the Kickstarter spring to hook into. So good call, Graham. Well done for picking that up. Is it insurmountable? Well, I don't know. Maybe I can drill or fabricate or do something else. I'm not really sure what I'll do. But in the meantime, I don't consider that I've lost anything. I just need to find the right place. I did order a couple of cotter pins, and I'm hoping they'll arrive, and we'll be able to put a cotter pin in and see if it'll actually spin over, and then it might be worth doing something about getting a plug made for the back to hook into the spring, and that's the spring I haven't got. But it's not the end of the world. But that's why it's a bicycle crank. There we go. That's a little episode for this week. And it is little. The clutch just took time to get the plates cut. And I got distracted by some other things and getting some work done. I'm about to look into a clutch rod. That won't be difficult. And I'm also looking at footrests. And that's taken a bit more time and a bit more of a thought process. But you'll see more about that in the next episode. In the meantime, like, send me a comment, love that, subscribe, or share it with your mates. Cheers. Have a good one.